Property boom or bust? Let's have a look. Good morning everyone, I'm Florian Heise and welcome to another episode of Heise Says. I've got my morning stein of coffee and I thought this Monday we would have a look at this article sent to me by a viewer. This is from The Guardian and it's asking the question, what's going on with the Australian housing market? You know, from free fall to boom. We are hearing conflicting things all the time from one part of the media to another part of the media. Then you look at some data and it doesn't align with what people are saying. You've got the media jumping on top of auction clearance rates. And then you dig into it a little bit going, oh, well, supply is low and there's quite a spread in where it could lie. And they never report the updated figures. So it's all just a bit funny. We've got mortgage arrears rates that have just shot up. And people are saying it's still only 1% or it's still only 1.5%. Yeah, but it's a 200% delta shift, a delta change, guys. That's big. That's a sign of where things are going. You know, we've had foreign investment boom, like boom in our property market and overheat it. We've got buildings with issues everywhere. We've got the RBA failing again and again and again and again and again with their predictions of the economy, constantly surprised. So the question has to be asked, is there a boom or is there a bust? Is this just all pushed forward by, you know, the media? Is it all pushed forward by the media to try and encourage consumer spending as a way of facilitating the economy? But the people are just not able to handle any more debt because wage growth has just stagnated. Wage growth has stagnated. In the construction industry, it's in trouble, guys. It's in trouble. I mean, I'll bring up here, have a look, just the trend of housing approvals and apartment approvals. It's trending down, guys. If we've had a little spike, it's probably the pre-Christmas jump, but we'll see. So I'm really interested to see what the retail figures will bring in over Christmas. It's just a sign of where the economy is going. Rachel was shopping yesterday. She was at Harbour Town and it was packed. It was packed. So hopefully people are starting to loosen their purse strings and may help stimulate a bit of consumer spending. So we'll delay the RBA having to do drastic, unconventional means till something can go our way, maybe. But let's have a look at this article. Let's have a look. You know, what is happening to the Australian housing market? Although prices in Sydney and Melbourne are on the rise, there are serious questions about whether they can be sustained. Well, yes, that's the question I'm putting forward to people. You know, it's okay. We're getting one argument put forward that there's a rise. That's from the core logic data. REA aren't seeing it, so there's a question there about it. But even if it is rising, and I wouldn't be surprised if you're getting a jump because interest rates have gone down so low, APRA requirements have dropped, and more people are entering the market. But what is going to sustain it? What is going to sustain it? You know, think about it. These interest rates are artificially low, I'd argue, to help stimulate this aspect of the economy. So imagine if you dropped them to 0.75 a couple of years ago when the economy was all going good, how much of a bubble would we have gotten then? So after 2 years on the back burner, rising property prices are once again becoming the subject of debate around the suburban barbecue. I already like Martin's style there. Yep. You know, the suburban barbecue, it's where all the world's problems can be solved. A well-respected annual outlook predicted this week that the cost of houses could rise by more than 15% in Sydney and Melbourne next year. Okay, and then we're having other, you know, Deutsche Bank concerned that 2020 is going to a potential housing bust in Australia. It is a conclusion matched by other surveys and forecasters. But do they give the whole picture? Are we really heading back into boom territory? And if so, what is causing it? So wasn't the market really struggling not long ago? Earlier this year, Australia's notoriously expensive housing market was in free fall. Prices in Sydney and Melbourne had fallen by double digits from their peak in 2017, with credit being squeezed by a nervous banking sector after the Royal Commission. The bottom seemed nowhere in sight. Sales were at a 21-year low, and there was concerns that the economy could suffer serious knock-on effects. Hobart, Canberra, and Adelaide were the only cities showing price rises. I mean, Hobart has really surprised me with how expensive property has gotten down there. Well, in a way it has, in a way it hasn't. I've been to Tassie and to Hobart, and I can understand why, if you're going to sell up, you know, in Sydney or Melbourne, and you want to get a green change, going down to Hobart. The only issue for me is the weather. It's cold. It's very cold. You kind of get used to the subtropical climate we have here in Brisbane, but I can see it. If I had NBN, bloody hell, maybe. But not with the house prices now. Not if I'm paying the same for a house down in Hobart as I am up here in Brisbane. So what is happening now? The outlook has changed remarkably quickly, at least in the two biggest cities. Both have seen a dramatic recovery, says the research firm CoreLogic, which produces regular reports on the market. That has surprised the Reserve Bank. Oh, the Reserve Bank. Reserve Bank is surprised, huh? Shock. Horrible gasp. Oh boy. Well, we're going to raise a stein to the Reserve Bank being surprised. So, and many private sector economists. Melbourne prices are close to showing positive growth for the past 12 months. Not bad considering they were down by 6.2% on the year in September. Sydney is not far behind. The auction clearance rate was 80.5% last week, albeit on smaller volumes than its peak. 80.5%. I'm going to look that up right now to see what they're telling me. We've got auction clearance rates, 80.5%. Well, no. That was on November 16th. When was this written? Okay, so let's have a look. Look at the 9th. No, it's at 74%. It's at 74%. Why is he saying 80.5% last week? There we go. So 19th of October, if that's what he's basing it on. So if this article was written in November, 19th of October was at 80%. And total auctions, 618. It was updated on the 24th of October. So it looks like he's basing it on the October data. So the situation is far from rosy in Perth and Darwin, however. It is also important to note that other data sets, such as from HomeTrack, show some suburbs are still well down on the peak. So here we are. I mean, good on Martin for drawing attention to the fact there is conflicting data sources. Okay, there's different data sources and different ways of analyzing it and different ways of presenting it. So how far are prices expected to rise? A closely watched annual report on trends in the property market published on Thursday predicted house prices could rise 17% in Melbourne next year and 16% in Sydney. The forecast by SQM Research says this will only happen if the RBA cuts rates again, as many expected to do next year, and if the Australian Prudential Regulatory Authority, APRA, doesn't tighten credit standards. But even in less benign circumstances, prices could still rise 9%, SQM says. Analysts at UBS, who had been quite pessimistic, concurred, saying in a note this week they expected prices to rise 10% next year. Well, there's another take. If they're saying that our interest rate cuts will rise prices by that much in two of our cities and will have a dramatic impact on housing affordability, should the RBA make those cuts? Should the RBA make those cuts? Let me know what you think in the comments. Should they do it or shouldn't they do it? So what has caused the turnaround? What has caused the turnaround? The simple answer is credit. Just as the downturn was caused by APRA's 2017 decision to restrict credit amid alarm about poor lending standards, the upturn has coincided with a loosening of credit restrictions. That's one argument. APRA don't agree with that. Scott Morrison's surprise election victory on the 18th of May seemed to change the regulatory landscape, and APRA abruptly signalled to banks that they could relax lending standards again. This, combined with two successive interest rate cuts by the Reserve Bank, has transformed the housing market, and buyers once again could leverage themselves to the hilt. The founder of SQM, Lewis Christopher, said APRA's post-election U-turn was critical. With APRA, what they really did was someone knocked on the door and said, look, you've gone too far, we've got a downturn in the economy, you've got to loosen the lending restrictions, and they did. Well, what does that tell you about our economy? What does that tell you about our economy? How much of our wealth is tied up in property, guys? Is that a good thing? I mean, here, I'm going to bring up one of my favorite websites from the Observatory of Economic Complexity. Just look at the complexity of the Australian economy, look at what we're exporting, visit the website, and look at some other countries, guys. Look at some other countries that you would consider similar to Australia, and look at the complexity of their economy and their wealth. And just compare our GDP which is at 48.5 of per capita GDP, to some of these other nations. Okay, if you haven't done it, guys, spend some time and look at it, because this is just, people are saying Australian economy is just selling debt to other people, moving debt around. And what is the long-term future of that? You know? So is credit the only factor? Christopher says another key factor, especially in Melbourne, is population growth. The Victorian capital has expanded from 4 million people in 2011 to 5 million in 2019. The availability since May of the cheapest mortgages in Australian history helped release the pressure built up during 2 years of tightening. The city has expanded by 1 million, which creates a largely underlying accommodation requirement for many people, Christopher said. This is backed up by figures from CoreLogic this week, showing strongest demand for owner-occupiers, up 17.3% from May to September, rather than investors, up 8.4%. But land prices have plunged in Melbourne. We've seen also, but down 20%. We've seen people pre-purchase apartments down 25%. And I'll link to those videos here as well about Melbourne land. Down 20%, guys. And this is where all these people are buying. But another thing to consider with the population growth argument, another thing to consider is that it is primarily fed by overseas migration, our population growth. So more than 50% of it. And you have to realize there are other social issues that come with that, and that has an economic impact. Now, the difference in cultures takes a few generations to wear through, and we're seeing this I would say, culture shock and intergenerational culture shock happening, particularly in Melbourne. And even if we just put that to one side and just look at the raw numbers, the amount of water requirements we have in this country has not kept up at all with population growth. And I will link to that video as well that I did up here. Just our population has grown by a quarter since 2020. Since 20,000, 2000, and our water has, potable water storage is barely under 2% increase. Okay, I go through all the dams. I'm not counting the desal plants, because, I mean, with a nation our size and the amount of land we have, I think burning energy to desalinate water is a last resort. It shows a lack of planning. But see, this is the problem. I think we're in the age of lack of planning at the moment. Just look at the amount of fuel, bushfire fuel, that people have to deal with. And while I mention that, I'm going to bring up another video now, which is to do with land clearance. And this is a video I did a couple of years ago. It's gotten hardly any views. And it's a farmer here in Queensland that tried to clear his land and essentially got fined $1 million. He wanted to make a fire corridor. Okay, have a look at that video, guys, and tell me what you think about government regulation and control in people trying to protect themselves. It's insane. I've heard stories. Friends have been telling me they've got mates out in the country. They're just illegally clearing because they don't trust it. They don't trust what was happening. The amount, or they could see it, particularly if you're next to a forest or a national park, just the amount of fuel was warning. But we'll get back to this. So chief economist at IFM Investors, Alex Joyner, also suggests there was a certain inevitability about the market reaction given Australia's love affair with home ownership. You take the Australian psyche around the housing market and mortgage rates that are below 3%, and prices in Melbourne and Sydney are destined to rise. But he's saying that, but we're getting a cultural shift, guys. Okay, we're getting a cultural shift. You're getting more migration from non-traditional sources, Asian and African countries, and the home ownership Australian psyche, is it going to be instantly transferred? Is that going to fuel it, or will it be a generation or two? I mean, I'm a first generation Australian, and I'm of European, German and Austrian descent, so there's a very close to the Anglo-Saxon tradition here in Australia. It's not that different, just don't mention the war. But someone from a quite different culture, it's going to take a generation or two to adapt. That's just reality, guys. That's how it happens. So putting all your bets on population growth is continuing this rise. I challenge. I question that. Another factor was suggested in a report from Credit Suisse this week, which said that the unrest in Hong Kong could be pushing wealthy people there to get their money out into the Australian property. Yes, we've looked at that before, but the numbers just aren't that much, and that's just the top end of the market, and we're seeing that reported. But us normal plebs that can't afford a $20 million bloody penthouse or paying double the reserve price, Well, that makes it makes for great headlines, but does it make for other issues? Does this mean we're in another housing boom? UBS called the surge a mini boom, but like many commentators, the bank's economists were quick to caution that this was highly unlikely to be a repeat of the boom between 2013 and 2017. I think that's actually called a dead cat bounce, guys. And what I'll do is, now if you're not familiar with a dead cat bounce, a lot of traders are. And we'll just wipe here. Let's have a look at some images. I mean, here we go. You've got a dead cat bounce. So this is a general fall, then a bounce up, and a continuation of a fall. That's the term if you're not familiar with it. You know, mini boom, dead cat bounce. It depends on how you see it. And you can see it all the time. Here we go, look at this one, dead cat bounce. Number 1, number 2, boom. This is the Nasdaq.com bubble. There you go. So, compared to prior cycles, we expect a much more muted multiplier effect for the real economy, UBS said this week, noting that Australia had the highest household debt in the world, the lowest saving rates for a decade, and home building and other construction works was headed off a cliff. So it might not last. Joyner says that the rise in prices in recent months would encourage more sellers to put their property up for sale, solving one problem in the market, lack of supply. But that wouldn't be good for the economy, he says. Household debt will weigh on the economy, and we're seeing that in retail sales. People are worried about job security, confidence in the future, and wages growth. Despite his report's bullish-sounding forecast, Christopher warns that prices are rising from an already overvalued position. So there is a serious question about the sustainability of the new upturn. With the market very susceptible to another change of heartbeat by APRA, an economic downturn, or any rate rises, the loosening of credit was always likely to stimulate the market when you add the population growth, but there was a price to be paid. So let's have a look at this. This is all sounding very similar to, this is Michael Yardley, a property agent, and he did a video 7 ways the market was going up, and population growth was underpinning it. And I was looking at infrastructure spending, foreign investment overheating it, and immigration, and the cultural differences that will associate from that. Sound banking system, sure we do, but the valuations present a risk to our banking system. We've got the cash ban bill, we've got UN policies adopted by Australian banks, we've got bank profits are down. Number 3 is going, Australia has a long-term undersupply of the right type of property, but consumer confidence in our apartments has just been trashed. The market is oversaturated, particularly in apartments. Debt is not a real worry, and this is his claim. But 57% of our wealth is in housing. If housing falls, if unemployment goes up and rent gets higher, that debt held by the wealthy Australians that can manage it, their serviceability is going to reduce. And again, he brings up the culture as well. Everyone brings that up, but I'm saying there's a culture shift. When you get multiple cultures come together in a multicultural society, your civilization changes and cultures change. So what was, considered part of Australian culture for the last 50 years may change. You've got Europeans, they're much more inclined, a lot of them, to rent and to be lifelong renters in apartments and those type of things. Very different to Australia. Rental accommodations in the hands of private investors, that's what he's saying, but the problem is, that a lot of the people who are paying the rent often can be dependent on the state to help subsidize that, and the government wants us to buy property, but I'm calling upon the broken window fallacy, first home buyers, FOMO, and just how it can overheat the market. So it all seems the same. So guys, I suspect what we're seeing here is the market starting to realize that we're probably having a dead cat bounce. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe. If you enjoy my content and want to help me produce more, I have a Patreon and a subscribe style where you can make a small monthly donation. I also have Amazon and eBay referral links where I get a kickback every time you make a purchase. It doesn't cost you a cent. And then I have PayPal and other means if you'd like to support me directly. Thank you everyone who supports me. I really appreciate it. It just takes the edge off and pays for the software that I have to upgrade every year now with our bloody, yearly upgrade, subscription models. Awesome. Take care guys. Have a great day and I'll talk to you later. Bye for now.